A lot of attraction advice tells women to do more. More support, more sacrifice, more patience, more availability, more emotional labor. But many men are not actually looking for another person to emotionally manage. They're looking for relief, relief from pressure, relief from performance, relief from feeling psychologically crowded. And ironically, some of the most attractive behaviors are not the ones that chase connection, but the ones that make connection finally feel breathable. That's the part people often miss. Because attraction is not just physical, it's nervous system based. Some people make relationships feel emotionally heavy, other people make relationships feel emotionally safe to exist inside. That difference changes everything. For example, one of the most attractive things to many men is self possession. Not distance, not coldness, self possession. A woman whose entire emotional world does not collapse every time the relationship shifts slightly. A woman who still has her own pace, her own interests, her own emotional center, not because she's trying to appear mysterious, because her identity still exists outside the relationship. That matters psychologically more than most people realize, because when someone abandons their emotional gravity to orbit entirely around another person, the relationship starts feeling heavy very quickly. Now there's pressure, now there's responsibility, now there's the feeling that one wrong move emotionally destabilizes the entire dynamic. That creates tension, not attraction, and honestly, a lot of men are already carrying enormous amounts of pressure internally. Pressure to succeed, pressure to provide, pressure to remain emotionally controlled, pressure to not fail publicly. So, when a relationship also starts feeling emotionally fragile, many men quietly begin associating closeness with pressure instead of relief. That's why emotional stability is incredibly attractive, not emotional perfection. Stability, the ability to remain grounded during small conflicts, the ability to not panic every time emotional distance briefly appears, the ability to let a moment breathe without immediately forcing resolution. That creates psychological safety. Because now the relationship stops feeling like a constant emotional emergency room. And honestly, a lot of men don't know how exhausted they are from emotional management until they finally experience a relationship that feels calm. Something interesting happens when men feel that kind of emotional safety. They often become more emotionally open naturally. Not because they were fixed, because their nervous system stopped preparing for emotional fallout. That's important, because many men do not withdraw because they don't care. They withdraw because pressure makes them regulate internally first. Which is why one of the most powerful forms of understanding is accurate interpretation, not interrogation. For example, a man comes home quiet after a difficult day. One person immediately says, "What's wrong with you?" Another person says, "You seem like you've had a heavy day. I'm going to give you a little space." Those interactions feel completely different psychologically. One feels like pressure to perform emotional clarity immediately. The other feels like being understood without needing to explain yourself first. That creates trust. And honestly, many men rarely feel that level of emotional accuracy because most people respond to male behavior literally instead of contextually. Silence becomes rejection, solitude becomes disinterest, focus becomes emotional absence. But underneath many of those behaviors is often stress regulation, not lack of care. That's why understanding creates deeper attraction than endless sacrifice ever will, because sacrifice can quietly become heavy. The moment someone starts losing themselves for you, love can quietly start feeling emotionally expensive instead of connecting. Now there's guilt attached to closeness. Now there's responsibility attached to love. Now there's pressure to deserve everything being given up for you. That's not emotional freedom. That's emotional weight. But a person who understands you while still remaining fully themselves, that feels very different. Now the relationship feels mutual, balanced, breathable. And another thing many men deeply value, a gentle backbone. Not aggression, not endless agreeableness. A backbone. A gentle backbone isn't about starting a fight. It's about having the quiet confidence to say, "I see it differently," without needing to win, without needing to hide. That creates enormous respect psychologically. Because someone who agrees with everything eventually stops feeling emotionally real. They start feeling adaptive, like a mirror. And you cannot deeply respect someone who disappears every time disagreement enters the room. That's why self-respect is attractive. Not because it creates power, because it creates clarity. You know who the person is. And honestly, one of the rarest things in relationships today is lightness, playfulness, the ability to create emotional relief inside stressful seasons of life. A lot of people unknowingly turn relationships into performance environments. Constant analysis, constant pressure, constant emotional monitoring, but someone who can laugh during difficult moments, someone who can create warmth without denying reality, that's incredibly regulating psychologically. Because now the relationship feels alive again, not just functional. And that's really what attraction often comes down to long term. Not performance, not perfection, not sacrificing yourself until someone finally chooses you, but becoming someone whose presence feels emotionally honest, emotionally grounded, and psychologically safe to exist around. That's rare, because the most attractive people are usually not the ones trying hardest to be chosen. They're the ones who remain fully themselves while choosing someone else too. And those are very different things. What's the hardest thing to maintain when you really like someone? Your independence, your emotional stability, or your gentle backbone? I'll be in the comments looking for the one that resonates most with you guys.